This webinar is scheduled to last 1 hour and will be recorded and available on the AMFA website under the Events tab. And with that, I would now like to turn the mic over to our meeting sponsor today, Tyler with Go Engineer.
Thanks, Amy. So I'm with a company called Go Engineer, and we are sponsoring this event through a sponsorship that was started with a company that you may be familiar with, and that is Alinex. We recently acquired Alinex. They're joining our family as the world's #1 provider of SolidWorks and also Stratasys 3D printers. So with just a minute or so of your time to introduce ourselves, I wanted to show you how we could potentially offer some immediate value. I'm showing our website here where you can find more information on all things SolidWorks, all things 3D experience from Dassault. Also, a whole arsenal of training options from in-person classroom training to online self-paced training, as well as the ability to access technical support and schedule things like what we call application mentoring sessions. This allows you to schedule one-on-one time with an expert on basically any module within SolidWorks. Choose your teacher and access their training calendar. The other thing that we have available to you for immediate value is our YouTube page, where we upload educational videos on SolidWorks, data management, 3D printing, just about everything engineering related, almost daily. So be sure, check those out. We're looking forward to being a part of this event and future events and having more of a presence out in the Midwest. So with that, I think I'm going to pass it over to who everyone's here to actually see, and that's Wade.
Well, I don't know about that. It's kind of an ugly mug to look at. Thank you. First off, I'd like to welcome everyone to AMFA's March meeting. I'd like to show some gratitude for everybody that continues to come out and support and engage with our association with all the challenges we're facing this time during these times. Each of us has adapted to deliver and receive information responsibly and to cultivate professional relationships. So thank you to everybody that's following through here. Although our methods of interaction have evolved, be assured that AMFA continues to not only exist, but to accomplish significant outcomes that enhance manufacturing throughout our region. At this time, I'd like to do some milestone announcements for anniversaries of companies that have been part of AMFA. We have 5 years. We have Enbridge Power Step Inc. And then for 10 years, we have Exodus Machine and Northern Engineering. At 15 years, we have Duluth Denfield High School. And 20 years, we have Mackinac Administrators. And then we would like to welcome our new members, L&M Radiator, Minnesota Deed, and Stern Assemblies Incorporated. A few updates. The AMFA website has been improved and offers more value, tools, and action steps. Past events like virtual webinars and member meetings are all there and full of current information. It's your doorway to the collective knowledge of the Iron Range and Twin Ports manufacturing community, so take a look if you haven't already looked at the new improved website. We continue the Marketing for Manufacturer series. It continues next week on March 17th with a presentation on digital prospecting, and you can register for that on the website under events. You can also post your AMFA or your job announcements on the AMFA website. That's just another tool you can use in your recruitment toolbox, and that is under the Workforce tab on the new website. You can let us know if you have or would like to do a virtual tour of your company, and we'll help you to get it out there to everybody and spread it far and wide across our area. AMFA continues to focus on our goals of educating our members, developing our workforce, and legislative advocacy. Part of that focus includes the AMFA Educational Trust, and also the AMFA board is planning a beverage tasting event on June 16th at the Clyde Ironworks and a golf social in August. And hopefully we can do all of them and have them in person and get out of the office for once and have a little fun. It's possible that we may have to change the beer tasting event, push it back, or cancel it again this year. Just depends on how everything goes here. At this time, I guess I would like to announce our keynote presentation on ISO certification. And our presenters today are Heath, who is a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt at Advanced Minnesota, and Ken Stocco, a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt at Workstream Consulting.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Wade, for the introduction, everyone. So like Wade said, my name is Heath Bowe. I'm an adjunct instructor at Advanced Minnesota. So again, Advanced Minnesota, the customized training branch for the NEHEAD schools. We are excited to be here today to talk about ISO 9000 certification. With that, Ken, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit as well? Ken, you're muted, I think.
Thanks, Heath. Yeah, I am also here today, like Heath. I work with Heath for Advanced Minnesota in that capacity as a Master Black Belt and adjunct instructor. And yeah, just looking forward to meeting you all and entertaining your questions and maybe giving you some information on ISO that you maybe have not heard before.
All right, so Ken's going to pull up the presentation, and we'd like this definitely to be an interactive presentation. If you have any questions as we're going through it, feel free to stop us and ask the question or type it in the chat, and we'll try and catch it as soon as possible and address it. So basically, we're going to try and do an overview, talk about the benefits of the ISO 9000 system and being certified, but just kind of what that implementation would look like for your company, or a way you could go through that pathway to achieve that certification. So, so next slide. So our agenda here for today, we're going to talk about kind of the background and the history around quality management systems, going all the way back to ancient times. We're going to talk about some basic principles around quality management and those quality management systems. We're going to talk a little bit about processes and systems and just how they're different, and how they're defined, and just the different way that ISO and ISO 9000 looks at them. And then we're going to talk processes within the quality management system. So they do have some prescriptive of, these are the processes we are expecting you to have in place, and just basically give a simple overview of how they function and how it all kind of ties together for a quality management system, and what that expectation is. And then at the very end, we're going to kind of wrap it up with one implementation approach out of many. There's lots of different pathways to get to arriving at certification. So we'll provide one and have that kind of as a roadmap, but we can definitely talk about that and where that could change and be different. So those are our objectives for today. So there's a couple different benefits that we have if you're using ISO 9000 and become ISO 9000 certified and have that quality management system. One of the big ones is what it can do as far as your market share and being able to expand, bring in new customers. So one of the things, as you're probably aware, that's sometimes a question out there. If you're looking to be a new supplier, that first question is, okay, are you ISO 9000 certified? It is a quick way for customers to validate their suppliers. Instead of having to come on site, do audits, check things out themselves, they can rely on ISO as that third-party validation. So, yep, you're ISO certified. Okay, now we can start that conversation. And particularly in some specific markets, like automotive, aerospace, around the medical, they require it. There are customers that is a conversation stopper of, if you are not ISO 9000 certified, you can't even bid on the new business, that you're just not going to get face time with that customer to be able to supply them with parts, pieces, what have you. And the last thing around customers is it really helps ISO, especially the last iteration here, has really focused on customers and your relationship with your customers. So talking about what their needs are, how you're going to go about corrective actions and what impact those corrective actions will have on your customers, as well as talking about through a risk assessment and different communications that they recommend, just really listening to your customer and getting more information back from them on how your product is performing and what potential impact it could have on their processes. So really, ISO has kind of been moving in that direction a little bit of just who is your customer and how are you working to make things better for them in the long term. So definitely there's a big component of market share and just being able to expand our customer base with an ISO 9000 certification. But that's not all, right? If we are really managing our process and have a good quality management system in place, we reap a lot of the benefits ourselves for our company. ISO, as it's defined, right, is asking us to map out the process, do a lot of identifying, figuring out what the core processes are for our businesses, but also what our support processes are, and then figuring out how to get better in each one of those processes. And so it really does provide that framework, that structure around continuous improvement. And with that, so in the framework with ISO, it has a lot of stability around it as well. So it asks for that documentation. We can talk a little bit about that if anyone has any questions. Documentation, it used to be, and we've got a slide coming up here, where ISO 9000 was a lot of paperwork, a lot of documentation, and that's what your ISO system was all of this paperwork. They've changed their focus a little bit with the new standard that came out in 2015, or their revised standard. So that's a little less onerous, but they still want the stability to be there. They still want you to be able to document and be able to say, this is our process, this is what we do day in and day out, this is how we control it, and this is what we give to our customer. The third bullet point there, so another benefit that we see internally is it sets up the structure so it can help us to solve those day-to-day problems, keep track of the product that's going out the door, but also the suppliers, the materials that are coming into our business as well. And so we can use the tools that we have for ISO 9000 to both address short-term issues, but also to be able to step back and have that different perspective, that kind of longer term look at, well, how are things going in our business? We set out these objectives at the start of the year. How are we doing in moving our way towards it, and having a good performance management system that lets us know, are we on the right track? And last but not least, right, with that documentation, a little bit of a playbook on this is how our major systems function. These are our support systems, and how everything kind of plays together, works together to be the business that we've had and that we've built. And so that gives us that documentation of, now if we've got employee turnover, or even we're just moving employees around to a different part of the organization, we have that structure in place in that documentation where it helps with training, with bringing on new people, but also that, well, this is what we said we're going to do. Let's go back and take a look. Are we still doing that? maybe we need to tweak our process, or maybe we need to tweak the documentation that we have to make sure it reflects currently what we're doing. So lots of benefits for us as a company internally as well, not just all what we can do for our customers, but also what that quality management system can do for us to be more efficient and effective with what we're doing. So a couple different benefits there. Really, when you look at the history and the background of ISO 9000, it's, at least to me, it's pretty interesting. We go all the way back to the Egyptian cubits. So back to ancient times, you think about the pyramids and how long they've survived and last, and they really are feats of engineering. And that engineering is based around the standardized measurement, the cubit. And so, right, putting those blocks together, really heavy building blocks to build the pyramids, things like that, they needed a standard measurement, and they needed that measurement then to be kind of their quality standard of, well, if we say it is this many cubits, it needs to be to fit in place. So that's really cool that quality has been around all the way back to when the Egyptians were building the pyramids. The next one, if we look forward a bit, so Eli Whitney developing the cotton gin, but he also had contracts with the U.S. government for firearms. And so one of the breakthroughs for him that he developed was for those firearms to have a bunch of different standardized parts. So you could disassemble them if one of the parts broke, disassemble it, and you could replace it with the similar parts, right? The duplicate part from, maybe it's another firearm, or maybe it's just spare parts, but those parts were interchangeable. And so with that interchangeability of parts, right, it wasn't, well, I need a gunsmith, I need someone that has that technical expertise to be able to fix or to be able to manufacture that equipment, those pieces, that I could have people that had less skills still be able to put those together and have that high quality standard for that final product. So we had kind of a breakthrough there of interchangeability of parts that Eli Whitney brought forward, along with many others about that time frame. So that was in the mid 1800s. And then we fast forward another 50 years or so, and we have Henry Ford, who really took those standardized parts and really put them into standardized systems. So he had ways of assembling that Model T, right, and having it come down the assembly line that were very standardized, led to very easily being able to train workers to be able to do the job. But that also led to not only just ease of training the workers, but consistency in that every Model T that rolled off the end of that assembly line was pretty darn close to the one that had rolled off there before it and the one that was coming after it, right? So they had really standardized parts that it came together around these standardized systems to build the first automobile. And so that was one of his big advantages as an automotive manufacturer, is he had those standardized systems. And so again, the maintenance, the repair of them was all very straightforward, in that interchangeability of parts and those systems allowed to do that. So kind of another step forward in being able to have standardized systems for around the quality of the automobile. Then the next one, right, to kind of to take another step forward, is this thing. And does anyone know what this is? MIL-Q 9858.
Isn't that military? Military
Yeah,
standard?
military standard, absolutely. Yep. So that is a military spec. So that is the precursor to the ISO 9000 system. So the U.S. military developed that, and they were called specs, right? So it's a mil spec. It was developed back in 1959, revised 1963, but basically it was around the quality management systems that the US government wanted their suppliers to have. Anyone that was providing parts, or even right all the way, from the smallest parts all the way up to tanks and aircrafts, had to meet this military spec, this military standard for quality. So the US government developed it first into the 50s, early 60s. And then ISO, right? So ISO came along a little bit later, a couple decades later, with more of a worldwide standard. That's where we have the ISO 9000 system that we have today. And it's gone through several iterations, several updates, usually about every 7 years or so, they update the standard. And so the MIL standard, they phased that out, and actually the US military eventually withdrew the 9858 standard in 1996 when the ISO 9000 system was really in place and was basically the standard across the world. So the military pulled that back and allowed the business and industry to drive what that quality standard, what that quality system should look like. So kind of the history behind where we've got to with that ISO standard, and really it extends back quite a bit further than you might first realize. Most of us could probably put together, well, yeah, Henry Ford, he had a lot of things together, a lot of systems in place to be able to create the Model T, but it extends even further back than that. So, it started kind of with the quality management standard in the 9000 system, but now today, kind of all the way to current day, we have environmental management systems. So that's the 14,000 series. And we have safety management systems, the 45,000 standard. So all of those part of the ISO family of standards that have been developed to manage and have high quality, and just have broken it apart into a couple of different areas. So with that, right, so there is a family within a family somewhat of the ISO 9000 systems. 9004 is a self-assessment piece. So basically the meat and potatoes of the standard is the 9001 standard. But there are other pieces to it when you get down to it and are looking through the different parts of the standard. And like I mentioned in the previous slide, there's now the environmental management standard, the 14,000 standard, and the safety standard, the 45,000 standard. So those are two other certifications that you can get for your business around specifically the ISO standards, not just the quality management standard, the 9001 standard. So that's a little bit of the history, a little bit of the background, and other options that are out there. With that, I'm going to kick it over to Ken for the next section here.
All right, so now that we've heard the history and a little bit of the background, I want to just share a little story that's been around forever, but it's a story of the 6 men and the elephant, 6 blind men that came upon an elephant. And each one went and felt the elephant, and all 6 of them came away with a different description of what an elephant is. You know, the first one grabbed it by the tail and said, or grabbed it by the trunk and said it was like a snake. The other one touched its leg and said it was like a tree trunk. The third one walked up and touched its ear and said it was like a fan or a palm frond. The fourth one, happened to grab its tail and said that it was like a rope. The fifth touched the side of it and said it's a big wall. And then the sixth touched its tusk and said it was like a spear. Each of them drew their own conclusion about that elephant from their own experience. So based on that, what do you think ISO 9001 is? And what you think it is going to a lot of it's going to be based on how the ISO 9001 system was developed. And there's really two ways to develop it. You could focus on compliance, or you could focus on value and improvement. If I'm focusing on compliance, I'm trying to pass an audit. So my goal is 0 findings on external audits. If I'm focused on improving systems and processes, the audit helps us to identify improvement areas. If I'm focusing on compliance, I'm going to tend to make it a standalone system that's separate from day-to-day management. You know, when it's time for an audit, we take the binder down and refresh ourselves on what we're supposed to be doing for ISO, as opposed to defining how the organization is run and how we do our day-to-day work. If we're oriented on compliance or oriented on clauses of the standard, focused on value and improvement is oriented on quality management principles. Another thing that might make you have a different viewpoint of ISO 9001 than another person is who's responsible for it. You can see how well a system is implemented if you've got one person whose job it is to manage a system versus is the system managed by the senior management who runs the company. And then finally, do you focus on rules or you focus on processes? So based on how you approach it and what you're trying to get out of it, it can look completely different from one company to another. So focusing on the value and improvement, what we like to say is if we focus on the principles, then the requirements take care of themselves. So some of the principles that are underlying with the ISO 9000 is a customer focus. And really, we don't need ISO 9000 to tell any of you about customer focus, right? You exist to serve your customers. And it doesn't matter what type of a business or organization you're running, the pathway to success starts with listening and understanding the voice of the customer. That includes product or service specifications, as well as ongoing communications, responsiveness, and et cetera. So that just makes good business sense to focus on the customer and understand what they need. Another one is leadership. Leadership provides the direction as well as the resources to make the organization successful. And one aspect of strong leadership is to ensure that resources are focused on the right areas, as well as applied as efficiently as possible. And leadership also sets the culture of the organization. Another principle is engagement of people. Part of that culture that leadership sets is to make people feel that they have ownership in the organization, and which encourages initiative and sharing of ideas. Probably the cornerstone of ISO 9001 is the process approach. So what we talk about there is we're talking about a process that generates value by converting inputs and resources into something the customer wants. So fundamentally, if I picture a process as like a box and I've got inputs and resources coming into it, what comes out of it should be worth more than what went into it. And that's the whole idea of running a process. And managing those inputs and the sequence of activities that happen inside that box make the most effective process that provides the most value for our customers. And then finally, within the ISO 9001 system is what we look for is taking all those processes and making them an interrelated sequence that together function as a system. Finally, the last three principles are improvement. So once you have your processes identified and they're functioning as a system, you know, what's your method of improving continuously as you go forward? And generally, what the ISO 9000 system is looking for is when you have a problem or when you have a non-conformance or a defect, get to the root cause of it, determine what the cause of that defect was, and correct it so that it does not happen again. Another big one is evidence-based decision-making. You know, we don't want to make decisions based off of I feel, I think. We want to look at the data, look at the information, and make our decisions from there. Another part of that is differentiating signals from noise. Is something really a problem, or is it just normal inherent variation. You know, this could all be summarized by saying we're deliberately and methodically working to keep opinions and biases out of our decisions. And then the last one is relationship management. And that's just understanding that you don't operate in a vacuum. You've got customers, you've got employees, you've got other stakeholders such as suppliers, the business community, and so forth. And understanding where you sit in relationship to them and how do you manage that relationship. And understanding the needs and expectations provides an advantage to the organization. So here they are again. These are the principles. I went through them pretty quickly. But if you think about all of them and how they all come together, they really make up the heart and soul of a management system. You know, whether you're deliberately making the decision to become ISO 9001 certified or to use ISO 9001 or not, you can't run a business without, in one way or another, doing these things. They provide the common direction and the focus for developing the processes that make up the management system. Without these principles, a system's merely a framework for managing transactional activities, or another word for that is a bureaucracy. If we're designing a system just made on rules and compliance and not focusing on these principles, we are in essence making a bureaucracy, you know, a paperwork machine. That's what we don't want to do. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Heath to talk a little bit about processes and systems.
Thanks, Ken. So with you know, focusing on those different principles, right? Really, at the basis, and Ken kind of touched on it already, we're talking about processes and then them coming together to form a system. So what is a process? Inputs and we do some work then to those inputs and creating an output that has that higher value. So we can be pretty straightforward in what our processes are and just thinking through and documenting them, right? Starting to lay that out. And once we have our basic processes, our core processes, sometimes they're called, determined, then we can start combining them of, okay, so when does this part of our process come in contact and act as a supplier to our secondary processes? And when we start combining those together, well, we can call that then a system. And this is our whole system group of interrelated processes that take us from start to finish to get a defined objective to reach our goal of the product that our customer is willing to buy. So really we can take a system, a larger system, and just continue to break it down into these processes. And we kind of have a graphic here on the next slide that looks a little bit like that of, all right, inputs, resources, we do our value-added activities, then we get those outputs. And it can all be just continuous then. So we can add in the outputs from one process are the inputs to the next process. And we just continue to combine them, go from start to finish all the way through, and pretty soon we have our system defined and documented. And so that's kind of where we suggest starting with as we're documenting our processes and building up our quality management systems. So within the standard, they call them clauses in the standard, but they have several different processes that are defined in the standard that are required that you have as part of your quality management system. So QMS, quality management system there. So you need to have leadership and management processes. And Ken talked a little bit about that as far as some of the principles there. You need to be able to document your support processes. So whether that's right, shipping or quality or engineering, things like that are support of our core processes, we need to be sure we have those documented so they have their own clause. And then operations, so our core processes, that is clause number 8. And then they have 3 other clauses here. Actually, they have 3 other areas that are called out in the standard. So We need to performance evaluation. So how do we evaluate how well we're doing? Are we doing what we said we're going to do, and how well is that working? And then not just stopping there to say, wow, we're really not doing so hot, but okay, like Ken had mentioned before, what are our improvements? What are we going to do to make sure we fix things so we don't see those errors, we don't see those defects going forward in the future? So they have a whole clause around our improvement processes that are required in that standard. And then the last topic that we'll touch on is planning. So how are you planning for both your day-to-day activities, but also your long-term planning of what are your objectives for that longer time frame? Maybe that's a year, maybe it's 2 years, and where are you going to migrate? Where do you want to develop your systems to improve your processes? So kind of a summary of the clauses that you'll find in the standard, but really I like the next slide. I'm a very visual person. I like this a lot better. So this is right in the standard too. So ISO has this as one of their main takeaways if you go in and look at it, where they are putting the clauses and the information that they're asking about in this plan, do, check, act cycle. So those are the arrows that we see around the square, and that is how they've built this framework around. So you plan the work, or you create the original plan here in the upper left where Ken's got the arrow. And so then that goes to both the support functions, the support processes, and our operations, and with input from leadership, absolutely, to create that plan. So so then the core processes, operations, so that was clause 8, they do the work. And so that's kind of that upper right-hand quadrant. So they do the work, right? We take the inputs and supplies, we do our processes and create the outputs. And so then we need to analyze it. So we do that performance evaluation, and that is part of the standard there. So that is the check part of plan, do, check, act of, okay, so we had this process. This is what we thought we would get. Did we get it? And if we didn't, then what do we need to do to fix it? But if we did, okay, are there ways to improve it, to make it more efficient, to have fewer defects, to really, and that's where the voice of the customer comes in a little bit of what are we going to do to improve? And so that's the act piece in the lower left then of, okay, we're going to take some action to make our process better for the next time. That's going to feed back into our longer term planning process. And so we're going to create a new plan for the next time we go through the cycle. And then, right, so just kind of around and around clockwise fashion for the whole process, with those pieces of our quality management system as an integrated part of the way we do our work, right? Not standalone, not something totally different. Does that visual help folks to be able to kind of see how that fits in the different pieces and parts to what ISO is requiring us to have? All right, we got a yes from Gail in the chat. Thank you. So really what we're trying to get at with the plan, do, check, act as well is this alignment piece. And so this is something that we talk a lot about as we're walking through. Maybe you've got, right, your different functions, your different processes, and you're way over on the left there, right, where sales does one thing, but shipping has something else, and there's operations obviously, but then quality has something else that they're working on. And let's not forget safety and environmental and then community outreach. And we're all just kind of going in our own different direction, right? We don't really have an overarching management system. We're not really all focused on the same types of things. We don't have objectives that are common. We're just all out there doing our thing. And maybe very, very intentionally trying to do the best that we can, but we're very localized and very inward focused. Now, the center one, maybe we're at that point, maybe your business is at that point where, okay, yep, we've got some common goals. This is what we're trying to do. This is where we're trying to move the business. And we're all aware of them, and we're kind of rowing in the same direction, but we're not necessarily all perfectly aligned. So that's that compliant, yep, we've got a system, we've got an ISO system, it's in the 3-ring binder, we can pull it off the shelf, but that's it. We don't really use it day to day. Where we really would like to help people get to is all the way over on the right-hand side there, where we have a quality management system that is truly a system. We're using it day in, day out, and it's value added. It's helping us to do our jobs better, to be more efficient with our resources, and to ultimately give our customers exactly what they want when they want it. So that's kind of a visual as well of what that quality management system can do when we fully integrate it as a system and are using it day in, day out to drive our work and our plan, do, check, act type cycle. And with that, so I'll hand it back over to Ken kind of to talk about a way that we could do this going forward.
All right, so Heath used the right word, a way to do it. And like so many things in the world, there's a lot of right ways to do things and a lot of wrong ways to do it. And I'd really like to emphasize that is, you know, there's different ways to implement ISO 9000, you know, and there's good ways and there's bad ways, and there's plenty of good ways and plenty of bad ways. The one bad way that we really want to avoid is the cookie cutter approach where, you know, we did it once someplace or we heard of someone doing it, and now we're going to mimic and replicate exactly what they did. And generally that doesn't work because it might have worked in one organization, but the odds of it working in the next one are pretty low unless the organizations are in the exact same place. So again, this isn't the only way to do it, but one way to do it would be to do a complete assessment of the scope of the existing system and its relationship with its customers, stakeholders, and operating environment. What that does is that gives us the requirements for what needs to be done. You know, and some of our assessment is going to show that there's systems in place already. You know, you can't be running a functioning company without having systems in place. So this assessment lets us know, you know, what do we need to tweak a little bit? What's fine the way it is? What do we need to add? What do we need to improve? And then we want to document the scope and the context of the organization. And when we do that, we assess and rank risks and opportunities, and that gives us objectives. So as an example, if we looked at an opportunity as far as, like we talked earlier about opening up another market share. If we said that being ISO 9001 opened an opportunity for us to get more market share, then we'd have an objective of getting ISO 9001 certified by this date. Risks, you know, assessing the risks could be, you might be looking forward and saying, I'm forecasting 3 years out, and the availability of skilled craftspeople, you know, looking at who's in school, what the demographics of the area is going to go down. I need to start thinking right now if I'm going to have employees that are skilled that can work in my organization. So if that was one of your risks, then you would have an objective. You know, do something. You know, maybe make an in-house training program. Maybe work with, you know, the local schools or colleges to try to get that training done. But what you're trying to do is identify an opportunity or a risk, and then setting a plan around how you're either going to exploit the opportunity or protect yourself against the risk. And then the next thing is we would map all the core processes, you know, in a chain like Heath described, you know, including the outputs, inputs, resources, the work environment and the infrastructure, and then what the value-added activities are within those processes. And again, we have another assessment, assess the current capability, document control plans for each process, develop objectives to improve the capability, and then determine the plans to meet the objectives. And then finally, once we have the processes mapped, define the sequence and interaction. And this is where we spend a little bit of time, because we're not only talking about core processes. You know, how does engineering interface with sales? How does sales interface with finance? How does finance interface with the production floor? How does the production floor interface with shipping? How are customer complaints handled? All those processes have to be interrelated and understand their interaction. And then finally, assign the authority and responsibility for the inputs, activities, and outputs for the processes. And that one goes to the statement that somebody is another word for nobody. You know, if you say somebody's going to do this, or correction, everybody is another word for nobody. If you say everybody's going to do this, that's another way of saying nobody's going to do it. Whereas if you assign it and you say somebody has the responsibility for it, then that responsibility is clear and everyone isn't waiting for the other person to do it. And then finally, we want to document this system. You know, what are our policies? What are our documents and instructions? And then how do we keep records, you know, of things like, you know, production lots, traceability, you know, actions taken to, you know, contain non-conforming product and so forth. This is one of those parts where I said earlier, the cookie cutter is not the right way to do it. The level of documentation, the level of policies and records is dictated by your particular organization, your particular situation. And then once we've done all that, now we have a system that we've got documented. We have the responsibilities assigned. We know who's supposed to be doing what and how we interact with each other, how our processes interact, how it's documented and understood. Now we want to monitor and measure how is this document performing. You know, am I getting the results I want? And if not, how do I know that? What am I monitoring it against? And how do I analyze and evaluate it? So this is kind of like, I like to use the example of, this is the football team watching the game tape on Monday after the Sunday game. Even if they won, even if the team won the Super Bowl on Sunday, they're going to be watching that game tape to say, what could we do better? How did this work? You know, this play was supposed to run like this, but it didn't. And analyzing and evaluating. Finally, and this is something to really put a lot of thought into. If you're going to get certified, you hire your registrar. You know, you are entering into a long-term relationship with this company that serves as your registrar or your registration body. So treat them like you're hiring, you know, an employee or a subcontractor. Bring them in for an interview. You can ask them some questions like, will you get a dedicated assigned lead auditor, or will it be somebody different every time? What's their experience within your industry? Do they do combined audits or certifications for quality, environmental, and safety, if that's something you're interested in? But think about all those and prepare some questions and choose the registrar that you know fits your business the best and is going to support you. Again, this is a key partner you have to help you improve your system and move it forward. And with that, that's the end of our prepared question or prepared presentation. And now we will open it up for questions.
Ken, I do have one question here in chat. How involved would it be to implement this process?
That's a good question. And the answer is it's going to be driven by where you are and the size of your organization and how fast you want to get certified. In general, the involvement would be, let's say that you're working on some management related activity 15 hours a week. I'm saying something other than being on the floor and solving day-to-day problems. If you took that 15 hours a week and put 4 of those hours into deliberately saying, I'm going to implement the ISO system, that's what I would think along those lines. Implementing it is, relatively straightforward. Then what you can do is get it implemented and then make it so it's self-improving, and then you're continually adding to that effectiveness of the system.
Are there any final questions? Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask them, or put them in chat and I'm happy to relay. And does ISO align with Six Sigma?
Oh, that's a really good question. Does ISO align with Six Sigma? Absolutely, right? So Six Sigma is definitely a concept, a tool that you could definitely integrate into your quality management system and use some of the tools and techniques. So process mapping is something that Lean Six Sigma is known for, and so there are ways to help us to get that a process map and to maintain those, and definitely in that whole performance management and improvement part, that is pretty core Lean Six Sigma. And so absolutely, sometimes I've heard in the past where, oh yes, well, then we have our quality system over here and we have our Lean Six Sigma improvement systems over here, and they're both trying to influence the core processes that might even be separate from them. Really, with the quality standards, trying to do now, and the most efficient, and it makes sense, is not to have them separate entities, but really to combine them and use them as your overall management system with your processes. So absolutely good question. And yes, Lean Six Sigma and some of the methodologies, the improvements that we can do there tie directly into an ISO 9000 system when it's working well and we're managing it.
Thank you. One more question here in chat. Generally speaking, does ISO certification lead to higher or more consistent revenue for manufacturers? Any industry metrics?
I can take that one. Generally speaking, I'm going to put the qualifier on it, is if you implement your ISO system focused on the principles and not the requirements, the answer would be yes. And generally the revenue is coming from two things. One would be increased market share. And that's pretty straightforward. I mean, there's metrics on that for opening up market share by having the certification. But the other one is if you're going in and applying the principles and truly embracing and applying the principles so that they're effective, your revenue will increase due to less rework, more efficient processes all the way through customer delivery, and then customer satisfaction. I really want to give the flip side of that answer, because I've seen it many times where people make a paper ISO system that's just there to, frankly, to say, so I can have a certificate on the wall. And if you're doing that, I really don't think it would have an impact. But if you embrace it and apply the principles, it would certainly have an impact in both of those areas.
Thank you. Well, it looks like our questions in chat are slowing down. Any final thoughts for anybody considering implementing this process?
Amy, this is Mary. I was just going to say, if people don't have questions right now, they can contact Advanced Minnesota, one of us, and we can assist them with any questions they might have or potentially doing an implementation of an ISO project.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Ken and Heath. With that, I think we can pass it back to Wade.
Right. Thank you, everyone.
I can speak for experience with working with Ken and Heath and Mary. They made the ISO process as painful as possible, as less painful as possible. It's still painful. We went through the process last year. We actually got our certification, I believe, in August, and it has opened up more doors for us. I was mentioning before we started the presentation today that because we have ISO, indirectly, our main customer was able to get into Medtronics because of our ISO certification. So it is helping us, and it is helping us to get in the door with people that won't answer the phone and talk to us before. We can now get in there and have that conversation with them. So it's definitely worthwhile if you're thinking about pursuing it to check it out further. And I highly recommend working with Heath and Ken and Mary. At this time, I guess, thank you, Heath and Ken, for taking time to share your expertise with us today. And I'd like to extend gratitude to our members for your continued support. And with that, we're going to end the webinar. And if anybody wants to stay on the line, ask Ken, Heath, Mary, myself, Amy, more questions, we'll stick around for a while. And thank you for attending today. And for those of you logging off, thank you. And we'll see you again next time. So everybody have a great day.